How are you? Welcome to Critical Moves of Telesur. On May 13th, the State Department of the United States launched a list of those who fight against terrorism. In their recent edition, we have Cuba. Cuba are also non-aligned governments like Venezuela. What is the State Department based on to make this list? What are the geopolitical indication does this procedure have? Let's begin. Today, I propose we review on Twitter reviews that to see what many people say about this list of the State Department of the United States. So let's begin by that of the President of Cuba, Mr. Diaz-Canel, who said, immoral United States breaks the record of injustice and cynicism. They accuse our country of not cooperating with terrorism. United States lies and defends because they can't respond with the truth without accusing themselves. We also have the one of the Foreign Minister of Cuba, who is Mr. Bruno Rodriguez. It says it's not a secret of those governments who have a policy against Cuba that they've been able to go against us. And let's not forget who is the one who has the control of the United States over Cuba. What our government has said is that we are not in that line. We also have the tweet of the General Director, Carlos Directo Cosillos, who said, the reiterated lie, the demonization of Cuba, and the instigation to hate and violence are part of the strategy of the electoral campaign of the United States in the south of Florida. They try to ensure the support of the extremist sectors and those who want revenge. Let's go over the tweet of the Foreign Minister of Venezuela, Jorge Arreaza, who said, Venezuela rejects the statements of the Trump administration that pretend to put the government of Venezuela as non-cooperative in the terrorist fight. After having a terrorist incursion in their own government, in their own territory. The Foreign Minister of Persia, they say, Mousavi, it's the story of foundation, financing, and having fostering terrorist groups, and the history of the terrorist groups in the past. United States is not a good reference to speak about anti-terrorist efforts. What does the United States base itself on to make a list on those countries who do not fight the terrorism? What are the arguments that they use? Let's go over this. United States being the most affected country of COVID-19, with at least 91,000 dead, they don't leave aside the aggression against sovereign countries who oppose their imperialist interests. This May 13th, the state government, they made a list of those who are not helping in the anti-terrorist efforts. Washington points at Venezuela, North Korea, Syria, and Cuba. In the case of Cuba, this is the first time that they appear in this list ever since 2015, when the then President Barack Obama took this list off of the cooperating countries with terrorism as part of starting the cooperation with Cuba. Well, once again, Cuba appears in the list. After not acceding to send back to the United States some people to the United States, the government of Cuba has denied that their nation has ever allowed or will allow that their territory to be used for terrorist acts against any state. And they have also said that they've only limited themselves to play the role as guarantee of the negotiation process between the terrorist groups and the government of Colombia. They said that the ELN negotiation with Cuba would go forward if the rights of the people of ELN would be guaranteed. However, President of Colombia did not go through with this, and this is why Cuba has said that they don't cooperate with the anti-terrorist group. In the case of Venezuela, they say that they have links to the FARC as well as to the ELN. It is important to note that ever since Venezuela has been a victim of terrorist incursion. This was organized by the right wing of Venezuela with knowledge and help of the United States and Cuba. The United States had offered $15 million if whoever turned in Nicolás Maduro because of links with drug trafficking. However, with no evidence. The United States attacks Iran, saying that they harvest Hezbollah. They say that Tehran is the country that most supports terrorists in the world. They also point out Bashar al-Assad of cooperating with terrorist bands. About North Korea, the authorities of the U.S. say that it is still unknown the situation of 12 citizens in 1970 with a Japanese aircraft. Let's review over digital press. For example, our own Telesur says on May 13th, Congress people of the United States demand information about the Gideon operation. The Congress has asked the White House more information about the Gideon operation, who wanted to send a coup to the president of Venezuela. We need answers. We need to know if the U.S. laws were broken by U.S. companies or U.S. citizens, and if any authority of the United States was up to date with everything that was happening. This Republican congressman has also said that they have asked for an urgent meeting to receive all of the explanations. They also require information of each one of the security members that held meetings about this topic, and we need to know if the Trump administration was up to date with this attack. Mr. Engel said that the State Secretary Mike Pompeo has rejected to give any information about this sea incursion on May 3rd. They said that they had not directed or led the failed coup d'etat in Venezuela. That's what Mike Pompeo said. Another news media, Escambray, this is May 18th, says, total silence of the United States 18 days after the attempt against the embassy of Cuba. It's been 18 days since the U.S. Headquarters of Cuba received gunpoint and gunshots without United States saying anything. It's not a tantrum of Cuba, because this is a matter of security that the United States is responsible of, because they are responsible of foreign representations on their land. Above all, when the Cuban delegacy have been object of terrorist attacks in the past 60 years. The list is long, and so is the list of dead people. And let's not forget that that the United States did finance and foster many aggressions against Cuba. Many times Cuba alerted United States of attacks against themselves. And this attack on the headquarters of Cuba in Washington on April 30th is a time when Donald Trump should be upheld with its responsibility and inform Cuba about this attempt. I would like to suggest an article that is called Solidarity gestures have increased with Cuba. This is published in Telesur on May 16th, and it's about several organizations have showed their solidarity with Cuba and Venezuela after they appear on the list of the United States of being fostering terrorist groups.
En la lista emitida por Estados Unidos de naciones que no colaboran con su llamada lucha antiterrorista.
A statement that is issued by Prensa Latina says that the government of the United States lacks of morale to certify the fight against terrorism. I quote, "It's United States who goes to state terrorism as a weapon against countries that oppose their imperialism. They increase violence to try to submit these sovereign countries. They also say that United States foster violations of the General Assembly of United Nations while giving them logistics, money, and training to the responsible people of these acts. On their behalf, the European Parliament has also rejected these acts. They have also denounced that there is a new crusade of the United States that does not cease in trying to destroy the countries of Cuba and Venezuela. Likewise, the left wing of the European Parliament say that Cuba has fostered the negotiation between the Liberation Army and the government of Colombia for many years now. And they request that there is a clarification of the role of Colombia that is now promoted by the United States." Let's go to our first pause. But before that, we would like to ask you to participate with the question of the day. And it says, interestingly enough, United States, who has been the promoter of coup d'etats and terrorist acts, has a long list of nations of those who do not cooperate in the fight against terrorism. Tell me what you accuse people of, and we will tell you what you are yourself. We'll go into a pause. We'll be right back. Is United States those who promote the fight against terrorism? Let's go over some facts. While the government of the United States presents itself as the main fighter against terrorism, many have been the accusation against them because they have fostered terrorist groups all around the world. In the Middle East, for example, they say that extreme organizations as the Islamic State or Daesh have been financed by the White House. The United States has also supported Al-Qaeda and some of their organizations, according to declassified files. Apparently, they have been created by the United States with the support of the UK and the Israeli Mossad. The fight against this extremist group has helped to have a public opinion that is against the people of the Middle East. This way, the West sets the way to have a clash of civilization and religions where the Israeli country will be benefited. Who is going to benefit from this? It will be United States at the end of the day. And with this, they take advantage and they make a list of countries who support terrorism. Let's not forget that the news media is creating an atmosphere of intimidation and fear, while they put ahead the policies of the U.S. policies over sovereign countries. Let's start with the analysis and our critical moves. From Argentina, we have a specialized journalist. Hi, Alberto. Well, we were talking about this alleged list of the United States that do not cooperate with the anti-terrorist movements. And as we said before, we have states like Cuba. This is new because they've been included once again after being eliminated in 2015 by President Obama. Iran, Venezuela, North Korea, nations that coincidentally are victims of the sanctions imposed by the United States. It's precisely these nations, they are a consequence of what United States are doing, that they are supporting terrorists. What do you think? Well, I am listening to the report that you just presented, and I think it's very complete. And what I see is the United States and the definition of terrorism they have is very wide because, as you just said before, many of the actions that the United States do in the rest of the world can also be qualified as terrorist. And there was never a definition of what terrorism is. So those countries that are in this new list are a bit contradictory because North Korea are included because of a fact of 1970. There are other sanctioned countries that are not in the list. What you can see clearly is a contradiction within the White House. Because on the one hand, Donald Trump contradicts Obama that took Cuba off the list. And now they put them back on the list as a country that does not cooperate. In that moment, Obama had put on the table a famous decree that included Venezuela as a U.S. enemy. And at the same time, it's true that with Obama, there was a support to the terrorist groups in the Middle East. Let's not forget Daesh and the Islamic State. They had all of the support and the incursion of this group in Syria, Iraq, and all of that zone was during the Obama government with Hillary Clinton as a Secretary of State. So what you can see is that there is a constant contradiction. But what is clear to them is which are the countries that represent an enemy. I was thinking that Donald Trump had some closeness with North Korea. However, now we see that they are included in the blacklist. Thank you, Alberto. Let's include Mr. Denshaw. He is a professor of international studies, and he is with us from the United States. Welcome, Danny. My recent guest says that the concept of terrorism that the United States is putting forth is elastic. What does the United States understand by terrorism? Well, the United States used that as an excuse to use an aggression against any country that they cannot dominate. The real terrorism is here in Washington. And what they do is to instigate war and aggression against Cuba for 6 decades, against Venezuela, where the Bolivarian Revolution has triumphed, and against Iran, against who they want to put their own path, and North Korea and Zimbabwe. So what we can see is that there's a double standard. On one hand, they do have an alliance with many terrorists. For example, the Islamic State, when they give services in favor of the United States. So we have to see who is the responsible party for terrorism. Thank you, Danny. Please stay with us some minutes.
Alberto,
Alberto,
en tu reflexión
in
anterior,
your previous reflection,
decía que, bueno,
you
el caso de
said
Corea del
that the
Norte no
case of
entiende
North Korea,
cómo es
it's not
incluido en esta lista
comprehensible
por un
why
hecho
they
de
are on
hace
the
ya varios
list
años
for a
se
fact
motiva
that happened
preguntarles si
many
esta
years
lista de
ago. So I
estados
would
que
ask,
simplemente no
this
colaboran
list
con
of
lucha
states, did you
antiterrorista,
not cooperate
según
with the
criterios de los Estados
anti-terrorists,
Unidos,
the fight?
el reflejo
Is this the
de la agenda
reflection
exterior
of
de
the
la Casa
foreign
Blanca?
agenda of the White House?
Sí, lo que
Yes.
yo veo es
What I
que,
see
por eso yo insistía antes, hay una contradicción,
is
porque
that
por un
there
lado
is a
Donald Trump
contradiction
en
because
algún
on one
momento
hand,
pareció ir en contra de
Donald
todo, o
Trump
sea,
seems to go against
digamos, los grupos
all of them,
terroristas
all of
que
the
actúan
terrorist
en
groups.
Siria,
For example, the
en
terrorist group that act in
Daesh
Syria,
o Estado
like
Islámico, como
Daesh or
llamamos
Islamic
recién,
State,
dejaron de tener intervención
stopped having
desde el momento en
any
que asumió
action ever
Donald Trump.
since Donald Trump
Esto es
took
una
office.
realidad contrastable, estos son datos, no es
These
opinión,
are facts. This is not my
no es
opinion.
casualidad
This is
tampoco.
not a
Hubo un
coincidence.
acercamiento con
And
Corea del Norte que fue muy resistido dentro
there was a lot of
lo que se llama el
actions
Estado
forth
profundo de Estados Unidos.
with North Korea,
Entonces,
which had a lot
la
of
contradicción a
reaction
mi
in
ver
the
es que
deep
esto
state of the United States.
representa sí
So
lo
what
que
I think is that
pretende el
this
Departamento de
is
Estado,
what the Department of
más allá
State
de lo que pueda
pretends
pretender Donald Trump. Ahora, hay una coincidencia en este
is what the
momento.
Department of State
Creo que el
reflects. And
gobierno
right
de
now,
Donald
I
Trump
think there is a
está en una
contradiction
encrucijada.
because
Por un lado,
the government of
tratando de
Donald
ver
Trump
cómo hace
is at a
para
cross point because
escapar
at
a su
one hand,
responsabilidad
they are
en
trying to
la
escape the
pandemia,
responsibility of the
la
pandemic.
pandemia, y por otro lado,
And on the
tiene una
other
elección
hand,
muy cerca,
there is an
y ahora
upcoming
están un poco
election that is very
preocupados en su
close
gobierno porque ven que
because they see, and
no
now they're
es,
worried
no va a ser un
because
paseo como pensaban
they
hace
it's
un
not going to
mes.
be a walk in the park like they thought it was going to be a
Creo que
couple
hay
of
una
months ago.
política en la que
I think there's a
coinciden esas
policy
fuerzas del Estado
that
profundo
all
con el
of these
gobierno de
deep
Donald Trump.
state
Por
groups
eso es que
agree
se
on,
incluye a Corea del
and that is why
Norte,
they
y
include
me
North
parece a
Korea
mí
on the
que,
list.
bueno,
And
si
I
nosotros
think
hablamos de
that
qué
if we
significa
speak
la
of
lista negra,
what
la
the
lista negra es
blacklist
una lista de países que
means
patrocinan
is a list of
el
governments
terrorismo.
that
Por ejemplo, el
foster
ataque en
terrorism.
Venezuela de hace
For
10
example,
días
the attack on
es un
Venezuela
ataque
10 days
terrorista,
ago is a
sin lugar a
terrorist
dudas.
attack
¿Quién
without
lo
a doubt.
patrocinó? Bueno,
And who is financing
por
it?
eso yo estoy hablando de este tipo de contradicciones
That is why I'm
que
speaking of these type of
marcan lo que es
contradictions that mark
estos últimos tramos de los gobiernos de Estados Unidos.
what these last governments of the United States
Danny, se
have
estaba
been.
refiriendo Alberto
Danny,
a los
Alberto was
sucesos
speaking
más
of
recientes
the most
en
recent
Venezuela a
events
partir
in
del pasado
Venezuela
3 de mayo, donde
ever
con
since May
pruebas
3rd,
el
when
gobierno
with
del presidente
evidence the
Maduro
government
ha
of Nicolás
mostrado
Maduro
la
has proven
participación no
the
solamente de
participation
Estados
of not
Unidos,
only United
incluso,
States
capturando a
capturing
mercenarios
mercenaries from
venezolanos, sino además
their
estas
country,
personas,
but also
estos
these
sujetos,
people
han declarado
have
que
declared
tuvieron un
that they had
vínculo
a
directo
direct
con
link
Colombia y la
with
seguridad de
Colombia,
Colombia
and the
tenía
authorities of
conocimiento de
Colombia
ello.
were
¿Por qué?
fully aware
Ya
of this
sabemos por qué
attack.
Estados Unidos no se
So now we know why United
de estos
States
hechos,
don't
pero ¿por qué ni
accuse
siquiera
themselves of it?
mencionar
But why
o
don't even
dudar de la
mention
participación
or
del gobierno
doubt
colombiano
of the
en estos
Colombian participation in these acts? Well, here the news media never talk about these events because they have an agenda. The United States has used Colombia for several decades for a base for the Latin American Zionist. It's like they're Israel of Latin America, so they can control Ecuador and the other countries in Venezuela. So we see that the terrorism that is happening now, Iran wants to take oil through the Atlantic to Venezuela, and Trump is threatening to attack these boats, these ships. So it's clear that in the midst of this pandemic, who are the real terrorists? And Venezuela, like all other countries, have the right to exchange, to have commerce with any other countries. However, United States send mercenaries to Venezuela, and they also offer $15 million for turning in Maduro. And we have other ways of terrorism where they have military bases, and they try to bring North Korea and Venezuela to their knees. They have 30,000 military soldiers on the border of North Korea. We have another post in China. These are the different forms to terrorize these countries, that what they want is self-determination, both economically, cultural, that for United States is unacceptable. What does the U.S. presence do in a country as the Middle East, just like you mentioned, and in other countries like Colombia? What is their function there? Well, what they do is to intimidate and threaten. These blockades are inhumane, and the U.S. people don't know about the effect of a criminal blockade such as this, like the one they have against Syria, Iran, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, Cuba. Those blockades, what they want to do is provoke chaos, hunger, and to unbuild the economy. These are wars before the pandemic, and now they're even more ferocious because United Nations have called for peace, and the Trump administration have intensified even more these acts of war against these countries that they think are enemies. Danny, about Cuba, why is the answer to what happened in the embassy of Cuba in Washington, D.C. have been so weak? Well, once again, we see the double standard, because if this was an embassy of Israel or UK, it would be a headline every day. This was not even, it was almost not even mentioned when there was somebody with an assault rifle committed this terrorist act in an avenue where there are many other embassies. So it was a direct act. But this has been in the last 60 years the attitude of Washington. There are many sabotage acts against Cuba. And the most terrorist act is a blockade that is designed, as I said, to suffocate, to isolate, to strangle the people. The 20 million of Venezuelans and the 11 million of Cubans. So when the people want to escape and flee from these countries, and when they leave their country, they flee, there you have CNN and you have other news media to record these movements as if it was the fault of the Cuban government. So there is all of a manipulation of the big stream media. Danny, please stay a couple of minutes with us. Now I want to ask Alberto. Alberto, to what point is it legal to have a list of countries that allegedly do not cooperate with the fight against terrorism in the world? What is the validity of this list? Well, for the United States, is a justification for any act that they might commit. This is a unilateral list. This is not represented by United Nations or any organization. So this allows the United States to have a justification towards their own internal policy for any intervention. So what we just said recently, with this maritime blockade in Venezuela, any type of justification would allow an explosion of any military incident that could generate a military intervention. So this, I think it's just a justification. A justification towards an internal front. To say that we have intervened because these countries have done so or such and such thing, but of things that they have never proven. It's a unilateral declaration of war. Thank you, Alberto. And Denny, we have a question pending It has to be, why are they at the service of the government or the White House, in this case the Department of State, to state that there is a group of governments that collaborate with terrorist groups without presenting any proof? Well, that's the way it is. We here speak about the big news media like the fourth weapon of the dominating class under the government, because they always promote propaganda, hate, disinformation against any country that the government has put on this black list. So it's important to make a big education movement, because what the people listen here is the New York Times, CNN, Fox, MSNBC. So they don't have another vision of what Venezuela is, of what Iran is, and what has happened in this criminal occupation for several decades on Iran, and what's happening with the Palestinian people, and how the blockade against Zimbabwe affects the millions of people who live there. So here in the social movements, it's we who have to do this job of awareness on the networks, because the big media only justify these wars. Thank you very much for this dissertation for Telesur. I want to thank you both for your time on our program. See you soon. Let's see a brief mapping on how there's been a traditional response against the United States, against these countries that are considered like not helpful. Blockade countries by the United States as a part of their foreign affairs policies. The United States has used this blockades towards non-aligned governments. Here are some. Cuba, victim of the blockade for over 60 years. The United States has applied a criminal blockade. The measures, unilateral measures, have provoked loss for over $138 billion, according to a report presented by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Cuba. Ever since Donald Trump took office, the diplomatic relations have gone back substantially and have losses that go over $4 billion. Venezuela has also been victim ever since 2015, when the government of Barack Obama deemed them as an unusual threat to the United States. And this is because they want the abundant reserves of oil and minerals in the world. And the loss of this blockade has caused $116 billion. Should the United States take over these reserves, they would enrich themselves widely. Iran, the sanctions were reestablished in 2018 with more emphasis on energy sectors, transportation, and finance. This produced that there be a reduction in foreign investment, and it affected the exportation of oil. They also have caused that there is a lack of goods and products that are imported from other countries. These actions have affected everybody's life. Russia, ever since 2014, during the Obama government, the United States announced the imposition of some sanctions against authorities. They say that Moscow are violating the sovereignty and integrity of Crimea. Among the sanctioned countries are oil companies that produce and export oil, and additionally the airspace organization. And the United States did not allow some Russian banks. China, they began their fight their fight against China in 2018 through the imposition of taxes in 2019. The Trump administration announced that there was going to be a prohibition of U.S. companies with Huawei, while they included companies that were on the blacklist. During the pandemic, COVID-19, the United States has not ceased their aggression that go from accusing China of creating the virus and going against journalists on their territory. North Korea, the sanctions of the United States go back to 1950 during the Korea War. And although they relaxed a little bit in 2008, however, the United States restated these sanctions against supplying weapons in 2013. Let's go to our second pause in our critical moves. Remember, we have the question of the day, which is, interestingly enough, United States has been singled out as the promoter of coup d'etats and terrorist acts in the world, and they have a long list of nations that say they did not cooperate. Do you think it's fair? Let's continue putting in context the coercive measures of the United States imposes on other countries. These countries are 120 countries of all of the regions of the world, and these countries made the organization of non-aligned countries. Let's see what this organization is about. In 1961, 53 African nations, 26 of Latin America and the Caribbean, 2 of Europe, and 39 of Asia got together to make the movement of non-alignment countries. In the midst of the Cold War, this organization represented diverse organizations, and they wanted to bring forth their position against a common enemy. This organization has as antecedent the Conference of Bandung, where 29 presidents got together, and they wanted to speak against the imperialism of the UK. They adopted 10 principles, which is self-determination, equality, peaceful coexistence. After the first conference in Belgrade, they wanted to identify and value common problems and establish policies from the perspective of relatively young governments. However, afterwards, they questioned the unilateralism that rose after the fall of the Wall of Berlin. They also speak of the preventive war as a mechanism of a concertation of the South countries. They speak of international security, and it's not coincidence that this comes right in the midst of the blockade and destabilization of the member states. This non-aligned government organization support financing and reject any type of terrorist acts. They also condemn any acts that are prone to do so. The organization has no hierarchy, and the presidency goes around to everybody, and they have no difference among who is president or isn't. This is a second part of analysis in Telesur. Let's talk with Dr. Miguel Jaimes. He's a master in political science, and he's an expert on policies that are related to the oil industry. Dr. Jaimes, do you hear us? Well, today we're going to speak not only about Venezuela, the Venezuela that has been blockaded, the Venezuela that now allegedly, with declarations of the state government, the Department of State of the United States collaborates with a group of terrorists. And in the same group, the same sack,
aunque utilizando
to speak in
evidentemente
a
una
way.
metáfora popular, mete Estados
They
Unidos
put
a Cuba, a Irán,
United
a
States, they
Corea
put
del
in
Norte,
Cuba,
entre
North
otras
Korea,
naciones que no se alinean a
Iran,
las
other
políticas
countries
de
that
la
don't
Casa Blanca.
align with the U.S. policies.
Estados Unidos en medio de esta terrible
United
crisis
States,
mundial del coronavirus, de la
in the
pandemia,
pandemic,
pero
in the
también
midst
una
of the
crisis
pandemic,
económica, una
they also
crisis
have
de
an
guerra
economic
militar
crisis.
propiciada por la ofensiva
And what they're
global.
doing is
Intenta presentarnos al mundo,
they're trying
a
to
los
present to the
diversos
world
continentes, una agenda
an
desviada de
agenda
lo que ellos consideran sus
of what they
relaciones
consider
internacionales.
their international
En
affairs.
Washington,
In
parece
Washington,
que
it
esta gente no ha
seems
logrado darse cuenta
that people
que el
have not been
mundo
able
ha cambiado, que
to see that the world
estamos
has
en otro
changed,
hemisferio,
that we
que
are
otras
now in
son
another
las tareas, la
hemisphere,
reciprocidad, la
that we are talking about
incluso la
reciprocity and
responsabilidad,
cooperation,
haciendo
and
hincapié
even
en este
responsibility.
contexto de ver la situación
Let's see in this
mundial en
context
este
of
momento.
seeing the
Una
condition of the
población
world
mundial
right
que
now.
ya sobrepasa los
A
8.000
world
millones de
population
habitantes a
that
nivel
is
planetario, con
growing,
necesidades, con
and with
desigualdades.
inequalities and many needs. This is a population that has gone for many centuries and has faced interventions, wars, coups d'états. This cannot keep on being the destiny of the world. The world is pushing towards a change, a real change, where there are agreements, where there are better relations. We have new and more important threats, and we have more challenges. Before going there, allow me to reflect on why, if the United States thinks that they can make a list of governments that cooperate with terrorism, why don't they do the same? And they make a list of governments that promote coups d'états. Well, United States could make a list of those former presidents that are parts of mafias and live in their state, and who controlled all of the money that has been taken over the drug cartels, and all of the money that they take from Afghanistan. 120,000 men were launched from airplanes, and overnight the market of heroin are controlled by U.S. organizations. So the world, the planet, is obligated to make a list of the big drug lords and terrorism in the United States. Those are all of those who are protected by U.S. organizations, the FBI, the CIA, the Department of State. These people who move with total lawlessness, and they just impose their law on the force. And what they do is they hit the world with fear. So it seems that the United States will not change because the world has no other need. And if they change, I think it will be even worse. For example, let's see what happened with Cuba. They were first eliminated of this list in 2015, and now under the Trump administration, they are now included once again. There are two aspects that I would like to speak with you. One is how to observe this polemic list in the context of the pandemic COVID-19. Well, it's totally delicate because how can Latin America and the Caribbean, that are 36 nations, over 500 million people, how do we understand the terrorism in this area? What are the antecedents in this region? What are the terrorist acts that this region participated in? When you see that there are contingency of men and women in Cuba, for example, that are going all around the world to help with their medical brigades. They have gone to the worst places in the world to help out, and not only of COVID, of other diseases. And these are armies of white gowns to help the world and give a hand to those countries who are in trouble. Look at the images, how the flights have arrived to Italy to fight the pandemic. We are a region of peace, of culture, of a democratic game. And we have had the biggest and the greatest literary expressions in Latin America. We have never invaded another region. Regardless of all of the pressures that there has been on Cuba, Nicaragua, and now on Venezuela, what we have been is we have shown solidarity. We are peaceful, and we have all have had expressions of peace. None of these countries, Cuba or Nicaragua, has taken to the Security Council a measure to invade or do away with any government in the world, as opposed to the United States. The other list I want to analyze with you is how this list that do not participate enough in fighting this against terrorism. What does it have to do with the upcoming elections? Well, how can we say that we have terrorist acts in our country when we don't have any terrorist groups here? We don't have Al-Qaeda, Daesh. We don't participate in any attempts, suicide bombs. The thing of terrorism here is not of Latin America. It has to do with the United States and other regions. The list is in the Pentagon and the FBI and the CIA. These are just slogans that want to be imposed to speak against the Latin American countries that have nothing to do with this. We are just pushing a policy of peace and justice. We have confronted with all of our decisions all of the policies that have been thrown at us. It's not part of our culture. It's not part of our political expressions to speak of terrorists or any expression that goes against the life of men, children, women. Latin America doesn't participate in terrorist acts. We don't put bombs. We don't have institutes to prepare to train terrorists like the United States does. Because they even have these dark security companies. This is not the role of Latin America. Well, basically, the Trump administration could have some interest in calling these nations as supporting of terrorists. But let's analyze it now in terms of the upcoming elections. Well, the elections in the United States are now doubtful. United States is trying to find some type of impact for their electoral benefit. Everything shows, the numbers show, that this time the genocide, the actors of the White House will not be totally benefited. A new mandate of the Republicans would be a suicide for the United States. It would be to put their economy in a total catastrophe and bankruptcy. This is said by the main editorials, New York Post, Washington Herald. It also says Wall Street, the CEOs, the main stock exchanges,
que una reelección del señor
that they
del
say
señor
that
Donald
a
Trump
re-election
sería
of
una
Donald Trump would be a
vean ustedes como el
catastrophe.
sistema de salud lo acabó,
Because let's not forget that he did
lo
away with the
dinamizó.
health
Y
system.
vean la
He just
terrible
put dynamite in
situación
it.
de salud que está
And look at the
viviendo por esta
terrible health
pandemia
situation that the United
Norteamérica en
States is
este
living
momento, por la
because of the
política
pandemic of
obtusa,
COVID-19.
Perdida del señor Donald
And
Trump.
with all of his lost policies. Dr. Jaimes, thank you very much for your analysis to our program.
Jugada crítica de Telesur. Hasta la próxima.
See you next
Hasta
time.
luego.
See you
Vamos a
soon.
las conclusiones.
Let's go to our conclusions.
Una vez más, el
Once
victimario
again,
se victimiza.
Donald
Una vez
Trump
más,
is
el principal
being a
delincuente
victim,
acusa a otros
and
de
now the
presuntamente
main
delinquir.
aggressor is accusing
Una vez más,
others once
sin
again
pruebas,
with
sin
no
argumentos
proof, with no
convincentes, y
convincing
con una moral por
arguments,
el suelo.
and with a
Estados
morale that
Unidos
is sweeping
señala
the floor.
con el dedo a
United
naciones
States
soberanas pacifistas, defensoras de
points at
causas
other
justas,
countries
y vale destacar esto en el
that
tiempo
they
que
are
corre,
accused of
líderes
something
en
that
la
they
lucha
cannot
contra la
prove.
actual pandemia,
Let's not forget that
de no colaborar
these other
en la lucha
countries
contra
are
el terrorismo en
leaders
los
in the
Estados Unidos.
pandemic fight.
Dime de qué alardeas.
Tell me what
Y te
you
diré de qué
what you
careces.
speak about, and I'll tell you
Una
what you
vez
lack
más.
of.
Por hoy cerramos el
Once
tablero
again,
geopolítico.
this is all for today. Thank you.